The blue lights hit your rear-view mirror before your brain even catches up. Your hands tighten on the steering wheel. You check your speed. Too late. Your mind starts racing. Was it that last turn? Were you speeding? Or is this about something else entirely? You pull over, engine idling, heart beating just a little faster than you'd like to admit. The officer steps out of the cruiser slowly, deliberately, like they've done this 1,000 times. Because they have. Now let me ask you something, and I want you to really think about it. What's the most uncomfortable or confusing thing that's ever happened to you during a traffic stop? Drop your answer in the comments, because I promise you, what you've experienced, or what you think you understand about these encounters, might not be the full picture. And there's something coming up that most drivers completely misunderstand. Something that can turn a simple stop into either a nightmare or, if handled correctly, a flawless legal case in your favor. Let's talk about something people don't like to say out loud. Not every police officer follows the rules. Most do. Many are professional, calm, and by the book. But it only takes one officer having a bad day, pushing their authority too far, or outright ignoring the law, to create a situation where your rights are violated in ways that can have serious consequences, for both sides. Here's the part most drivers miss. A corrupt cop doesn't always look corrupt. It's rarely dramatic. There's no movie-style villain moment. It's subtle. It's small decisions stacked on top of each other. A question that shouldn't be asked. A delay that goes too long. A tone that shifts just slightly. A refusal to respect silence. These are the moments where things begin to unravel. Picture this. You're sitting in your car. The officer walks up. "Do you know why I pulled you over?" It's a simple question, but it's not as innocent as it sounds. Most people answer immediately. "Maybe I was going a little fast," or "I think I rolled through that stop sign." Right there, without realizing it, they've just handed over a piece of evidence. Not because they're guilty of anything serious, but because they felt pressure to respond, to cooperate, to appear respectful. And that's human, completely normal. But officers are trained to observe everything. Not just your words, your tone, your hesitation, whether your hands shake, whether you avoid eye contact, whether you answer quickly or pause too long. And here's something that might surprise you. Silence makes officers uncomfortable. Not because it's illegal, but because it disrupts the flow of control. If you calmly say, "I prefer not to answer questions," you haven't done anything wrong, but you've changed the dynamic. Now the officer has to adjust. Some will respect that, others won't. And this is where things start to get interesting. Let's say the officer keeps asking, "Where are you coming from? Where are you headed? Have you had anything to drink tonight?" You've already said you don't want to answer questions, but they keep going. Not aggressively at first, just persistent, repetitive. This is a pressure tactic. It's not necessarily illegal, but it's designed to wear you down. Most drivers give in, not because they want to, but because the silence feels awkward. It feels like resistance, and people are conditioned to avoid conflict, especially with authority. Now imagine you hold your ground, calm, polite, still. I'm choosing to remain silent. Now watch what happens next. The officer's tone changes, maybe just slightly. Step out of the vehicle. That moment right there, it's one of the most misunderstood moments in a traffic stop. People think stepping out means they've done something wrong. It doesn't. Officers are generally allowed to ask drivers to exit the vehicle during a lawful stop. But here's the nuance. Why they ask, how they ask, and what happens next matters a lot. Because sometimes, this is where an officer who's pushing boundaries starts making mistakes. You step out. The officer positions you near the rear of your car. Another officer might show up. Backup isn't unusual, but it changes the psychological pressure instantly. Now they start observing more closely. Why are you so nervous? That question is almost guaranteed at some point. And here's the problem. It's a trap disguised as concern. Because no matter what you say, it can be used against you. If you say, "I'm not nervous," they'll say you look nervous. If you admit you're nervous, they'll interpret it as suspicious behavior. And let's be honest, who isn't at least a little nervous during a traffic stop? This is where many drivers unintentionally escalate things. They start over-explaining, talking too much, trying to justify every movement, every decision. And the more you talk, the more material is available to be interpreted, twisted, or misunderstood. Now let's shift into something that can quietly turn into a legal goldmine if handled properly. Time. Most people don't think about how long a traffic stop lasts, but legally, duration matters. A stop is supposed to last only as long as necessary to address the reason for the stop, checking your license, registration, maybe issuing a warning or citation. But what happens when that time stretches? 10 minutes turns into 15, 15 turns into 25. The officer goes back to the cruiser, stays there, comes back, asks more unrelated questions. Mind if I take a look inside your vehicle? That question often comes after a delay, and it's not random, it's strategic. Because prolonged detention without clear justification can cross a legal line. And some officers know exactly how close they can get to that line without stepping over, or at least they think they do. Here's where things get risky for them. If an officer extends a stop beyond its original purpose without reasonable suspicion of another crime, that extension can become unlawful. And if they then conduct a search, question passengers aggressively, or delay returning your documents without cause, they may have just handed you something incredibly valuable, a flawed stop. And flawed stops can turn into flawless lawsuits. But, and this is important, you don't win that situation by arguing on the roadside. You don't win by raising your voice or trying to out-lawyer the officer in the moment. You win by staying controlled, composed, and observant. Because every second is being recorded somewhere. Body cams, dash cams, sometimes even your own phone. Let's talk about another moment where things often go sideways. The officer takes your license and registration and doesn't give them back. Minutes pass, then more minutes. You're standing there, waiting, unsure if you're free to leave. So you ask, am I being detained or am I free to go? That's a powerful question, but timing matters. If asked too early, it can escalate tension unnecessarily. If asked too late, you might have already allowed the situation to extend longer than it should. And here's the subtle detail most people miss. If the officer still has your documents, you are not free to leave, which means the clock is still ticking on that detention. Now imagine the officer avoids answering directly. Just hang tight. That phrase sounds harmless, but legally, it's vague, and vagueness can be a problem. Because the law doesn't operate well in gray areas when it comes to detention. It requires justification. Now let's bring passengers into this. Passengers often think they're invisible in these situations. They're not. Officers may question them separately. Where are you guys coming from? Now you've got two people potentially giving slightly different answers, not because anyone is lying, but because memory and perception aren't perfect. That discrepancy? It can be used to justify further suspicion. And this is where things start to stack. Extended time, repeated questioning, inconsistent answers, nervous behavior. Individually, these things might mean nothing, but together, they can be framed as something more. And sometimes, that framing crosses a line into misconduct. Let's talk about searches. Do you mind if I take a look inside? That word, mind, is doing a lot of work, because it sounds optional, casual, low pressure. But in that moment, it doesn't feel optional, does it? There's a uniform, a badge, a power dynamic that's impossible to ignore. Most people say yes, not because they want to, but because they feel like they should. And here's the reality. Consenting to a search removes a lot of your legal protection. Even if nothing is found, even if the stop was questionable, your consent can make it harder to challenge what happened later. But refusing consent? That's your right, and it doesn't make you guilty. Still, some officers will treat it that way. Their tone shifts again. So you don't want me to search the vehicle? Now it sounds like defiance, like you're hiding something. And this is where emotional pressure peaks. Because now you're not just answering questions, you're managing perception. And if the officer decides to search anyway, claiming probable cause based on vague observations, that's where things can become legally questionable, strongly questionable. Now imagine this entire interaction captured on video. The repeated questioning, the prolonged detention, the refusal to respect silence, the vague justifications. That footage becomes evidence. And not just evidence, it becomes a narrative. Because in court, it's not just about what happened, it's about how it's interpreted. And when an officer cuts corners, ignores procedure, or stretches authority too far, that narrative starts to shift from enforcement to violation. Let's be clear about something. Not every bad interaction equals a lawsuit, and not every lawsuit is flawless. But when multiple small violations stack together, that's where things change. Unlawful extension of a stop, coercive questioning, ignoring invocation of rights, searching without valid cause, detaining without clear justification. Individually, these might be arguable. Together, they can be powerful. But here's the part that most people get wrong, and this is important. You don't create a strong legal case by being aggressive. You create it by being disciplined, by not taking the bait when the officer repeats questions, by not filling silence with unnecessary explanations, by not consenting to things you don't fully understand, by staying calm when the tone shifts. Because the moment you lose composure, the narrative can flip back against you. Now, I want you to think about something. How many times have you seen videos online where a driver argues loudly, challenges every statement, escalates the situation, and then claims their rights were violated? Sometimes they're right, but sometimes their own behavior muddies the situation, and that makes it harder to separate misconduct from reaction. A clean case, the kind that stands up in court, usually comes from someone who remained steady while the officer didn't. That contrast matters more than people realize. Let's go back to that moment, the blue lights, the pullover, the initial question. Everything that follows is a chain reaction. And the officer? They're building a picture in real time. But so are you. Every question asked, every delay, every shift in tone. You are witnessing a process that either follows the law or quietly drifts away from it. And when it drifts too far, that's when something unexpected happens. The power dynamic starts to shift. Not in that moment on the roadside, it won't feel like it. But later, in a courtroom, in a legal filing, in a piece of footage played back slowly, where every second is analyzed. That's where a corrupt cop doesn't look powerful anymore. They look careless. And carelessness, when it involves someone's rights, has consequences. So the next time those lights come on behind you, remember, it's not just about getting through the stop, it's about how you move through it. Because sometimes, without realizing it, an officer might be building a case against you, and other times, they might be building one for you.